So it's mid-May and time to think about spraying round your plants in the woodland garden. Now, at the moment, we've got a lot of plants which are just coming into leaf, and we've obviously got to be careful we don't get any spray anywhere near them. And what are we trying to do? And if we look at this young Starax tree here, you can already see that there's weed growth and grass germinating around the base of the plant. Now, if we don't get that killed off and get it back to bare earth, if we have a dry summer, that grass and those weeds are going to be competing with the roots of this tree for the water that is available. And in a dry summer, that may not be a lot. So we don't want competition there. We want to get rid of those weeds. And also, the point of putting these wire netting cages around these plants is to keep roe deer and rabbits away from nibbling the bark at the bottom of them. Now, when the grass has grown up to here, as it will by early July, it'll be quite difficult to see these plants. So the second reason for spraying around them is to highlight where the plants are, avoid hitting them with a strimmer, avoid hitting them with an Allen scythe or a scythe. And that wire netting will do part of that job, but it needs to be clear of weeds so we can see what we're doing. So in a hot day, Tim is dressed for a bit of spraying. He may look as though he's come from a COVID hospital, but actually these are what health and safety requires to be used if you're spraying on a commercial basis in a garden as we are. And of course you can only spray on a day when there isn't any appreciable wind, because if we get spray drift on the wind, we're going to go and spray a lot of things we didn't intend to get any spray anywhere near. So Tim's now going to come up and just whip round this young tree. It only takes a minute. The sprayer has got a fine jet, and you can see that there's no spray drift at all happening there. And if we move on to looking at some other plants, over here, you can see this young beech tree hasn't yet come into leaf, and one of the reasons it hasn't come into leaf is because look at the amount of grass that's competing for the water around it. Now there's no leaf to get in the way of any spray, but we do need to get that all sprayed off and right around the rabbit guard as well. And then when we've got a rather smaller plant with some foliage, right down nearly to ground level, Tim's got to be very, very careful just to direct the spray at the weeds that are there, just to dab them round and to go round the outside of the rabbit guard as well. And there's another one there that could clearly do with a bit of weed removal. Not so much of a problem there with catching any leaves, but now you wouldn't spray around a rhododendron which had its leaves close to the ground. Rhododendrons are even more susceptible than anything else to any spray drift. So if you had a small rhododendron, you'd actually put a pot over the top of it and then spray around it, which is what we do in those situations. You can cover a very large area in a small space of time. But what you're doing is saving yourself a great deal of time grass cutting in the summer, and you're also doing your best to ensure the survival of the young trees which have been planted here, in this case for 3 or 4 years. Something you only need to do once a year, and we'll now move on and show you the effects of what Tim has done 2 or 3 weeks after he first did the spraying, and you can see what we've achieved. So we're now in another area of new planting where the spraying was done 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the spray has worked, and as you can see, all the grass and the weeds that were competing with this young cornus have now died. and effectively anyone on a ride-on mower or with an Allen scythe or with a scythe can clearly see where this plant is when the grass is up here, as it will be, and more to the point, when it rains the water will go into the soil and into the roots of this young cornice tree, and it won't be dissipated and being used up by a load of weeds instead. So if we look around at some larger trees and some smaller ones, we can see that we've cleared the weeds away from around all of them. And if we look over here, we've got an established clump of azaleas, which we want to keep weed free because they're quite small plants. And here you can see we've kept that all clear, so these plants will gradually grow together without any weed interference. And if we look here, we've got some deciduous azaleas which we only planted about 3 months ago, and again we don't want them encumbered by a lot of grass and weeds, and equally we don't want somebody driving a grass cutter and not seeing them. So it's much easier just to spray out the weeds around this patch and keep them sprayed out until this clump grows together and doesn't need touching again. It's not a very, doesn't take very long to do, but when we look here you can see not a hint of any spray having got on the leaves of these azaleas. They've been careful and the spraying has all been done on a very still day.